My name is Kelly Condon. I am the program coordinator for the Texas Oncology Foundation, and I just want to welcome everybody to our live webinar, Caregiver Confessions. This is our foundation's Survive and Thrive webinar series. We've been doing it for a little bit now, and we are just thrilled to have Stephanie Broussard with us today. She has just become a quick partner with our foundation, and she has jumped in on so many levels, and we just appreciate her greatly for it. For those who are new to our foundation is here to provide support to cancer patients in the communities where they live, work, and receive treatment. And through our Survive and Thrive programs, that is just one of the ways that we are in communities, helping provide support and with the goal of building that community connection for everyone involved on the cancer journey, including our wonderful caregivers, which is why we have this session today. I just want to go over a few Zoom tips and tricks to help you while you're on this session with us. Just to reassure you, you can only see and hear us. We cannot hear or see you, so don't worry about that. If you are having any technical difficulties, typically the best solution is just to exit and rejoin the webinar session. That's anything from the slides don't look to be moving forward, or you're having some audio issues. That's always a helpful way to get it to kind of restart. Like I mentioned a little bit earlier, as people were joining, we want you to use the chat. Open up that chat box. If you have questions for Stephanie, if you like something she said, we want to hear about it. So send it in. And I know Stephanie is going to use that chat box throughout. She's going to be checking it and wants to know where you're at, what you're thinking. So please, please, please use that chat. And then lastly, we are recording this webinar, and the online archive will be available for viewing after the live session. And this can be found at our foundation website, texasoncologyfoundation.org. It's under our programs tab, and then you'll see the Survive and Thrive webinar archives there. Lastly, like I mentioned, we are thrilled to have Stephanie Broussard with us today. She is the Director of Palliative Care and Social Work at Texas Oncology. She is a licensed clinical social worker and has actually spent the last 12 years working as a medical social worker focusing on geriatrics and palliative care. And so, like I said, she has just quickly become a champion for our foundation, and we are so grateful for just her partnership in so many programs we have going on. And so, Stephanie, thank you for sharing with us today, and I have greatly been anticipating this session, so I'm going to give it over to you.
Well, thank you guys so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. And as Kelly said, I am a champion for the work that the foundation does because I get to see firsthand the benefits that it brings to the cancer community. So it's so great to be an ally and support all the wonderful things that they're doing. And so I also love getting an opportunity to share with patients and caregivers. And so this is a great opportunity. It's a win-win for me as well. So today we are going to talk about caregiver confessions. And so I want to start off with a little caution. Today is going to be a real conversation, straight, no chaser. I think it's really important that caregivers get an opportunity to have a conversation, have resources, be poured into without all the layers of things that come in regards to the caregiver role. Sometimes we need people to peel back the onion a little bit and help us get to the heart of the matter so that we can have the resources and support that we really need to make the distance. And so that's what I hope today is. But I also hope to have a little, add a little laughter and reality. And I think to really make sure that we have fun, but also really deal with the heart of caregiving, learn some skills today as well, and get some support from each other. So as Kelly said, let's use the chat box. We want to communicate. This isn't a sage on the stage experience. I want to hear from you guys who are living and breathing caregiving currently, okay? So let's get started. So our objectives today are to explore the caregiver role. We're going to get real, but we're also going to identify symptoms of caregiver burnout and explore self-care. We really don't do anything if we talk about caregiving and we get really real and talk about all the things that come with caregiving, but we don't talk about how to prevent it and how to manage it as well. So it's important that we'll also explore self-care. So just a little perspective. So back in like 2017 or so, I was reading this magazine and I saw this page where it said 10 Caregiver Confessions. And I thought it was absolutely perfect way to sum up the things that I hear patients and families say or caregivers say when they're in a session with me that they never really share out loud. And so it became this reoccurring theme when I do have some caregiver seminars where I talk about caregiver confessions. And it's been one of my sessions that I get the most feedback from for caregivers, really talking about how those are the things that I thought that I would never dare say to anybody else. Those are the things that I felt and I thought something was wrong with me, or I thought it wasn't normal. I thought I didn't love my loved one the way I should because I was feeling or thinking these things. And so we're going to talk about it today. We're going to get real and talk about some of the things that you maybe never uttered before. So some confessions. When you guys hear me say caregiver confessions, if you're out there and able to get into the chat, are there things that spark up in you? Like, is there an emotional response? Is there a little bit of nervousness? Is there something that comes up in you that makes you think, well, where is this headed? Or things that you think automatically that you've thought that maybe you've never said before? Or is there something in you that you wonder, have other people thought too? Are there some confessions that are lingering for you that you've maybe not shared before? This is a safe space. So I want you guys to jump into the chat. And as I start to share some, I want to invite you guys to share some as well, okay? So our first confession, I don't want my parents to move in with me. So when we think about caregiving, and this could be parents, loved ones, sibling, when we think about caregiving, sometimes, especially when we're dealing with cancer or advanced decline, the needs change. When an individual's activities of daily living are impacted, sometimes you have to explore living arrangements. Is it safe for them to still live home independently? And oftentimes that means a person as caregiver has to consider, well, now does that mean that my loved one has to move in with me? And sometimes the reality is I maybe don't want them in my space. I love them. I want them to be safe. I want them to get all their needs met, but maybe also I enjoy the sanctity of my home and the security of my home the way it is. And maybe, especially for the sandwich generations, we deal with I want to be able to meet the needs of my parents, but I also want to create normalcy for my children. And so a lot of times there's a lot of layers of guilt that comes with the idea of, maybe I don't want my loved one to move in with me, even as caregiver. And so when having to explore different living arrangements, there's a lot of guilt that sometimes caregivers hold on to when having to explore the different options. So today we're normalizing the idea that sometimes there's some resistance to the idea of your your loved one moving in with you, okay? And it's totally okay. It doesn't mean you don't love them, doesn't mean you don't support them, doesn't mean you're not concerned about their safety and well-being and wanting all of their needs met. It just means that maybe you don't want them to move in with you. Okay? Another one is, I didn't sign up for this. One of the things I think that's really important to note is that the caregiver isn't always, rainbows and butterflies and great feelings. And I think that's okay. And we really have to normalize those feelings of ambivalence, right? Where I love my loved one, I love it's an honor to serve, but also I'm tired. Or, today it's just been too much, or this is more than I thought it would be. And I think it's okay to identify the reality of that feeling. And then the next is, I'm lonely. I think it's so important that we identify that with the caregiver role can be isolating, especially when our loved one has dependence on their activities of daily living. That means that we have to be there day in and day out. And so initially, people still include us. People still invite us to social events. We're still included in our social circle. But then sometimes we become isolated because our loved one may be not able to leave home, especially if we think about the pandemic. I think one of the gifts of the pandemic, and I hate to say gifts because it's been such a trying time, but one of the opportunities that came out of the pandemic was that we've explored a lot more virtual engagement. And so people have ways to connect in ways that we didn't really have before. So I would often hear for caregivers that their whole identity was engulfed in the caregiver role because everything else that was available to them, they were no longer engaged with. And I have a comment here that says, I'm finding it hard to get help safely during COVID, such as house cleaning, et cetera. And I think that's really important to note is that even when we have the desire to reach out, sometimes some of those, there are barriers sometimes. And so how do we emotionally cope with when I've made the emotional realization that I need some help? And then maybe the resources that we need aren't there. And so I think it's so important that we explore it, but also getting connected with community and support organizations to help us identify what are some other opportunities. And so Anitra, we'll talk a little bit about resources too, because I think it's really important to explore options and some ways to connect and resources that may be able to help us with finding options in the home safely. One of them here that we have is I'm not good at asking for help. And that goes specifically to the last comment about, you know, I won't help, or maybe I don't know where to get help. But specifically, a lot of times I hear individuals share with me, they'll say, well, I feel like I shouldn't have to ask for help, or I should be able to just do this and not need any help from anyone. I should be able to navigate this space all on my own because this is my loved one and this is what I signed up for. And so there are barriers to asking for help. We even culturally see certain groups where, you know, it's believed that a family unit should be able to handle everything on their own. And so we see a lot of times where people are just suffering in silence. And the reality is it's okay to ask for help. The fact that you can't do it all doesn't mean you don't want to. And maybe you should be doing it all. Maybe there's some supports that you do need to lean on and bring in and get involved. And so it's okay to ask for help. We as a culture have to really normalize saying it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to need support. And that's how we create and foster a sense of community. One of the things I love about being a social worker is creating a normal engagement with individuals to say, hey, we're here to help you. We want to support you. We want to make sure that you get connected to community providers or community engagement or services that can really help you as you help your loved one. And so it's normal. And it's also normal to not be okay and comfortable with that. But we really want to normalize asking for help. And then a confession I hear all the time, and it usually comes with a lot of despair, is I cannot do this. The reality is that caregiving is hard. And there are some days that you feel like it is not impossible. It is impossible. I can't go another step. I can't go another day. I can't go another moment. If it's going to get worse, if the needs are going to increase, I'm not sure I can do it all. And I think it's completely normal to have those moments. What we have to do, though, is explore, can you not do this in the moment? Can you not do this anymore, like continuing to do this? Or how do we make sure that you have the supports and encouragement to be able to go the distance? For some patients and for their caregiver, their journey could be years, some is months, but for all, it's important to note that the caregiving experience is different and it's multifaceted, and it affects us physically and emotionally as caregivers. Just like we explore the needs of patients physically and emotionally, we have to look at the physical impact on the body of a caregiver, especially if we're assisting with activities of daily living, but also the emotional impact over time. And so to say, you know what, feel that weight and say, I can't do this is okay. But we have to explore where it's coming from. And if you honestly cannot do it, how do we pull in the resources to make sure that your loved one gets the support? But I think there's so much power in the vulnerability of acknowledging that I cannot do this, or the feeling that you cannot do this, so that you can be reinforced and supported. A lot of times when we see severe caregiver strain and burnout is when people have failed to acknowledge that maybe they had a place of fatigue, or they had a place of where they felt like they couldn't do a task or a particular area and we didn't know how to help them because we didn't know it was there. And so it's important to be able to verbalize your pain points, especially to your providers or those providing support, so that we can help you get some respite, or help get some in-home support, or find some support groups and really help you plug in. So I cannot seem to forgive myself. And I think this is one that I hear more so than not in sessions near end of life. And I think it's really important that we touch on it early, because a lot of times with caregiving, there are things we miss, you know, on our bad days. Maybe we're not as energized or sympathetic, or some days we may have, we served lunch late, or one day they were late to an appointment, or they missed their medications, or something happened, because life happens, because we're humans having human experiences. And so for whatever reason, when families get to end of life transitions, all those things come flooding and rushing in. And so I hear families or caregivers say, I just can't forgive myself for the day that I, had to have somebody come help because I just was exhausted and I didn't want to do it anymore. Or all the times that I complained. But the reality is that part of the journey and part of the caregiver experience is the reality that you can love your loved one, you can be completely committed to their care, but also be exhausted. You can love your loved one and be completely committed to ensuring that their needs are absolutely met, but make a mistake and forget to give them their medication, or have a day where you guys both spend the whole day in your PJs. And we have to normalize the fact that one doesn't negate the other. So it's really important that we have spaces where we forgive ourselves for the days where we don't want to do it, or the days we miss our old life, or miss the things that we normally would want to do, because caregiving can be it doesn't have to be all of us take over our identity, but for many, it is consuming. We throw ourselves into the caregiver role, and so part of our lives become part of caregiving, and it takes over. And sometimes when we miss the old, we have trouble forgiving ourselves for that, especially near end of life. I have families that I deal with, I support for grief and bereavement, and I hear that, like, I wish I wouldn't have complained those days when I was tired, but you were tired and it's okay. And we have to normalize all the feelings. We can't just talk about the blessings and the gift of being able to care for anyone. But we have to be able to feel both and know that that's okay. So we have a question that says, do you ever talk about regrets versus guilt with caregivers? And so I'm just going to stop right here and talk about it. I think it's really important that we explore the difference between the regrets and guilt. So in my mind, regrets are things that maybe I wish I would have done differently or considered, or ways I would have approached a situation differently. And if we're not careful, the emotions that are attached to our regret will become guilt. And so guilt is where I have despair and distress and emotional pain connected to the excuse me, connected to the feelings or the thoughts that I have about things I maybe would have done differently. It's important that we don't allow our regrets to have emotional attachments or have emotional manifestation of guilt, because when we are caregivers, there's so much opportunity for us to do woulda, coulda, shoulda, to explore if I would have done differently, if I would have maybe taken them to the doctor at this first sign or symptom, or gone to another doctor, or gotten a second opinion, or asked for additional services in this area, maybe this would have gone differently. And I think it's really important that we explore those feelings and get to a safe space where we can process those, because what we have to do is make sure that guilt doesn't overtake us. And guilt can manifest itself into depression and anxiety if we're not careful. And so it's okay to have some regrets where I wish I would have made a different decision here, or I wish we would have done this a little bit differently, or I wish we could have managed that a little bit differently. But we want to make sure that we manage the emotions that are attached to that regret, because if we're not careful, it becomes guilt. And I think that's a dangerous place for us to be as caregivers. I think it's natural, it's normal for some of us to have some guilt, but we need to process it and not hold on to it. And so forgiveness is important. We have to forgive ourselves, but it is completely normal. It is completely appropriate to feel guilt and have areas that we have to work through, which is the whole point of this conversation, right? To identify that is a normal feeling, a normal statement. Another one is, my loved one is verbally abusive. And so a lot of times I'll be working with a caregiver and they're, it appears to have a little bit of a hard time and distress. And it'll be a while before they ever share with me that they feel like their loved one is maybe unappreciative, or that's kind of how it starts. They just don't seem to be grateful that I'm here, or they think I have to be here. And then I'll hear little indicators that maybe there's some emotional abuse going on or verbal abuse going on. And one of the things I like to share is that even though cancer or illness happens, that does not change the fact that family dynamics are still there. And we talked a little bit about this earlier in the week when we talked about managing the emotions and depression and different things that come with cancer. But the reality is that family dynamics don't change just because there's a diagnosis. So if there are already family dynamic issues, sometimes this can be exacerbated by cancer in the caregiver role. But then also, when we don't have a lot of control, and especially it's fair to say that an individual who's dealing with a life-limiting illness or a serious illness, they sometimes have a feeling of lack of control. And so we'll see a lot of emotional changes, maybe some changes into their communication, some aggressiveness. And so it's common to hear a caregiver say they're so mean or angry, or they just yell at me. They're not patient. I'm trying my best. And they're just so verbally aggressive. And it's completely normal to verbalize those things. That doesn't mean all the way that they're a bad person, but they're also in an emotional crisis, right? They're also trying to manage their emotions and their feelings and about having cancer or a serious illness. And so sometimes when we're not able to clearly communicate those things, we see a manifestation of that in verbal aggressiveness, or impatience. A lot of times, I actually just had a family last week where the caregiver is a daughter, and the mom, she's just so impatient. And I'm always here and I'm always helping, but she'll yell at me if I take too long, or if the food doesn't taste the way she thought it would, or anything like that. And we have to kind of process how she didn't want to share that with anyone, or even her siblings, because she felt like it would mean that she didn't want to be there, or she was trying to say her mom was a bad person. And I explained to her that it's important to share those feelings in safe spaces, but also so that we can help you process and understand like how you can maybe set some boundaries for yourself in regards to that emotional aspect, but then maybe bring somebody in to help you guys process together. So it's completely normal to have feelings about, you know what, the way they communicate with me, even though I'm doing everything I can, doesn't feel good. So this is a tough one for a lot of people, but one of the first comments we got was about family dynamics and how I'm the one that showed up, I set boundaries, and my other family members didn't, and they're angry about it. And so this says I'm disgusted with my family. And so I hear from both sides. One side, I hear from the primary caregiver where they've taken on all the role, right? They've taken on everything. They've been thrust into caregiver. And then there's a Cinderella child or a Cinderella family member who just shows up maybe one day, sticks their head in the door, and they get all the praise and adoration. Whereas the one who's doing all the work and here doing everything, they get all the verbal aggression. They have to do all the hard work. Or there's the dynamics which was shared in the comments where I've set my personal boundaries. I'm going to help. I'm going to support you. But here's the space that I have available to do that, versus in comparison to maybe a sibling where every part of their life has been taken over in the caregiver role. And so it can create a dysfunction and resentment within a family unit. And it's important to acknowledge that. Caregiving is hard and it impacts the whole family. And that's why we talk about and provide support like this, because it's really important to communicate where your feelings are. Some families, you don't have additional support. Some people aren't going to sign up. Some people aren't going to step up. And so you've done that, right? You've made the choice to be the person that's going to provide care, whether it's from a distance or whether it's the hands-on day-to-day caregiver. And so it's completely normal to feel like, you know what, no one's showing up, or to have some uncomfortable feelings with your family. But it's really important to try to process those and communicate with your family and create a space where you all can talk about them. And if not, maybe bring in a provider or a trained professional to help you guys communicate that as well. I think I've become numb to my loved one's pain. And so I want to be clear to share this one. This doesn't mean you neglect them as far as, they're in pain, so you're not giving them their pain medication, or they have a need and you're not meeting the need. So I want to be really clear. We're not condoning emotional or physical abuse here. What this is speaking directly to is that you've almost become a little bit of a robot. So they have a need, you give medicine on at this time, you know what to do, you have your plan in place, you're responding to all their needs, but there isn't an emotional response or a connection there for you. It's like you've almost become a robot and you've stepped outside of yourself to be able to maintain the day-to-day functions. It's become so routine. And so you almost feel numb to the pain of your loved one and the space that they're in. And so this is completely normal. But one of the things is that this is a key indicator that we're close to burnout. And so it's really important that when we start to feel this, we are aware and that we call it out and get some support. But it's completely normal and part of the journey. Even for those who have been caregivers for a longer period of time, we're more likely to see this because it becomes so routine. I give medicine 10, 12, 2, and 4. If there's shortness of breath, we do this. If there's, any nausea, we do this. There's a routine. And part of caregiving, we do that. But also, we know to be true is that when we've experienced a lot of emotional distress in the caregiver role, our minds can do this out of protection. So if we've had a lot of emotional distress, a lot of highs and lows, because we had maybe a lot of hospitalizations or surgeries or ER visits, we can do the emotional roller coaster of the caregiver role. And so sometimes our minds out of protection will help us to deal with the emotional impact by kind of dulling our senses a little bit. And so that's really important that we make sure that we process and get connected to people that can provide us support so that we want to feel, right? We want to be able to adequately process what's happening and we want to put it in a correct and appropriate space, but we also don't want to be numb. But it's okay if you're there, and that's why these confessions are so important, but we want to make sure that you get support when you can. When should a caregiver, we have a question, I'm sorry. When should a caregiver seek assistance for those who want to try and do it all? That's a really great question. I think what's most important about caregiving is that you identify for yourself what are the personal boundaries of normalcy for your life that you want to try to maintain. So you as an individual outside of your caregiver role. So for example, one of the things that I do with my families when we sit down and do a session specifically related to life-limiting illnesses, and that'll be a long trajectory, we talk about what's one thing you want to keep and maintain. So hypothetically, we're in Texas, the Bible Belt. For a lot of people, it's usually church comes up. They say, I always want to make sure I stay connected and I go to church and I go get my hair done. Oh, I'm just throwing that one in there, okay? So what we talk about is how do we develop a plan that makes sure that you have a caregiver safety plan almost in place, so where you keep these things in place for you as a caregiver. So if part of your needs is to be able to go to church, how do we make sure that somebody can be here with your loved one so that you can go to church? Or if you want them to go with you, what does that look like to have support to do that? If you go get your hair done on Wednesdays at 2:50, I don't know. How do we make sure that you have support and coverage to be able to protect this time? But then also, maybe there's some things that are really important to you. For example, I'll use my own family as an example. Excuse me. When my grandmother was declining, one of the things that's really important is that they believe my grandmother prepared meals every day for my grandfather. She prepared breakfast, lunch, and dinner. That was what her expectation. And so one of the things that was really important is that even though my grandfather cooks as well, but that meals were provided in her home consistently. And that always didn't mean that they had to provide them, but that there were 3 meals a day in her home, and how to consistently meet that need. And so that doesn't mean my grandfather had to cook as a caregiver, or my aunt, who was also assisting them as caregiver, but that meant there had to be a system in place to make sure that happened. And so does that mean we have meals delivered? Does that mean that We get engaged, with our support community, our church community, to say, hey, we want to make sure that these things happen, and allow people to volunteer. We're like on Caring Bridge for those things that we know we want to happen. Even when it comes to like housekeeping. One of the things I know to be true, that I've had families where a clean house was a deal breaker. The house had to be clean. Well, if mom being primary caregiver and taking care of the activities of daily living, or a spouse, then she can't clean house the way she wants her house to be clean. So that means that that's a service that we know automatically is to relieve some of her burden. Let's bring a housekeeping agency in to make sure that that's something that's met. So it's really important that we sit down and develop a caregiver plan, just like we do a patient care plan, to make sure that your needs are met as well. And so I hope I answered that question. I feel like it was the longest answer, but I hope that was clear. So another statement that we get, and I think is one of the hardest ones to digest, is that I think it's time for my loved one to let go and die. So I'm a palliative care social worker. And so we are talking about a lot about mortality. We are talking about end of life care. And so I've heard this a lot of different ways. I've heard people say, like, I feel so bad because like, it feels like they're just lingering, or I feel like, I love them and I want them here, but maybe they're suffering. And so the contemplation of those thoughts weighs so heavy on caregivers. And I really want to take an opportunity to normalize that those feelings don't mean you want your loved one to hurry along. Those feelings don't mean that you don't want them here and you don't want to share time and space and you're not grateful for sharing time and space with them. What those feelings mean when they rise up is that you are concerned about their quality of life. And maybe at this point, your focus is shifting from quantity to quality, where you're considering what's most important about their time here. Is it that I have more days with them, or what those days look like for them? And so a lot of times when I hear this from people, it's not like you're trying to take them out, because I think people dare not utter the words because of what they fear the perception may be. But when I hear someone say this, I hear that they're thinking about, I want them here, I want the time, but what does that have to look like for them? I don't want to see them suffer. I don't want to see them struggle. I want them to have good days. I want to be here and support them. And so it's really important that you know that those feelings are normal. It's completely normal to have this ambivalence of, if I would give anything for more time, but I'm also really tired and I can tell they're tired too. And so, like I said, it's really important. You'll hear me say over and over again, it's really important to tap into the services that are available, whether it's your social worker, whether it's outside counselors or support groups, because all of these feelings are normal, whether it's any statement that you've seen here today, anything that you've thought as a caregiver that you're like, there's no way this other people feel this way. I want to normalize it all. All of the thoughts and all of the feelings of caregiving are real. The highs and the lows all come part of the experience. And so we want to make sure that you guys feel safe in acknowledging those and know how to get help and process them when they come. So that brings us to caregiver burnout. And feel free to jump in and stop if you have any questions as we go along. So when we talk about the confessions, one of the things that's really important is that we be able to identify what's a normal thought about the caregiver experience and when should I be concerned? How do I know that like this is just me feeling all the feelings that come with this versus me on the brink of burnout, okay? So some symptoms of caregiver burnout, and this list isn't all inclusive, but some things to kind of keep an eye out is lack of energy. So you're caregiving, you're doing all your roles. Of course you're tired, right? But we want to think about when we see like that overwhelming fatigue, when you're barely functioning, where you're having to make a decision between, how you manage your personal energy in order to make the day-to-day, meet the day-to-day needs. So overwhelming fatigue, you want to watch out for that. So sleep problems, where you have the desire to kind of sleep too much or too little. So where you're having to, you see this a lot, especially when we're having to get up overnight. And so you're tired. It's normal to be not tired, right? Because you're checking on them, make sure they're okay. But really when we're not sleeping at all, we're just neglecting our sleep patterns. because we have to meet their needs, or we're just deciding, our body shuts down, so we're sleeping through a whole day because we're exhausted. Changing the eating habits. You wouldn't believe how many caregivers I've seen that have lost tremendous amounts of weight because they're so focused on their loved one eating that they themselves forget to eat. Or they're just going, and they don't have an appetite because they're just spinning. Or those who gain so much weight because they're trying to emotionally cope by overeating. So it's really important that you identify if there are any changes to your eating habit and kind of watch for those. The feeling of hopelessness. And so we'll talk about this in a little bit of a different perspective. I think depending on the stage of your loved one's illness, hopelessness can sometimes be normal, but we want to make sure we keep it in perspective and talk about the feeling. And so the feeling of hopelessness, we want to make sure that we're adequately processing it, that we don't stay in this kind of like where the gray cloud, if you think about it, is kind of over us and we're just kind of completely hopeless about everything. Because I think at some stages of illness, it's completely normal to say, I've lost hope that maybe we'll find a cure, or I've lost hope that we'll necessarily beat cancer. So having those feelings sometimes is completely normal. But what we want to do is maybe make sure that we shift our hope to something else. And so in palliative care, we talk about a lot of times how people feel like choosing palliative care for some may be quitting the fight. And so my job is to help people understand that it's actually not, it's just changing our opponent. So maybe we aren't fighting cancer, but now we're fighting for quality of life. We're fighting for symptom management. We're fighting for quality living. We're fighting for days with our family that we can enjoy. We're fighting for memories. And so we have to shift our focus sometimes. And so feelings of hopelessness can be normal, but we want to help navigate those to make sure that we can get to things to hope for, even in what appears to be a hopeless situation. Withdrawing from or losing interest in activities you once enjoyed. All of these things, if you see them, are also symptoms of depression, right? And so we have to try to make sure that we're watching for those things. And so withdrawing from things can also be due to the caregiver role. So if you're doing activities, maybe you used to be part of a bridge club or those kind of things, and now you can't go because now you have to be a caregiver, that's different than emotionally withdrawing from things that you normally enjoy just because you've lost interest in them. And so we want to make sure that we understand the difference in those things. Neglecting your own physical health. One of the things that's really common is that we have caregivers who end up with serious illnesses because they fail to go to their doctor's appointments, or they fail to go to get their checkups when they didn't feel well because of the role of caregiver or the need to be a caregiver and not having support, or having to have someone be there with your loved one and you don't have anybody to fill in. And so it's really important that caregivers do not neglect their own physical health so that we don't end up with issues, because it's kind of like what they say, when you're on an airplane, in the event of a crash, you want to put the oxygen on yourself first and then help those around you. And so it's really important as caregivers that you maintain your health and your care, because if you're not there to care for your loved one, then who's there? You have to be healthy and be in a good space to be able to do that for them. The feeling like a caregiver is controlling your life. The feeling like caregiving is controlling your life. And I think I mentioned this before. It can consume you because of all the things that come with caregiving. And so that feeling is a normal feeling, but it also is an indicator of potential for burnout if we have it coupled with other things. Becoming unusually impatient, irritable, or argumentative with the person you're caring for and others. Anxiety about the future. We also, when we think about anticipatory grief, that's also considered. Depression or mood swings. Difficulty coping with everyday things, headaches, stomach aches, and other physical problems, and lowered resistance to illness. We know that our body keeps the score. Our body responds to our emotional distress. And so a lot of times we'll see that. We'll see where we have caregivers start to become ill or maybe have repeated colds or issues because their body's responding to the emotional distress. So how do we manage some of this? I think what's really important is that if you start to see signs and symptoms of burnout, that you really look at what are your practices, what are you doing? What are some things that you can do to implement self-care for yourself? How do you put some things in place that help you really manage the needs of being a caregiver? And so the most important thing is self-compassion. Nobody gets it right 100% of the time. We all try our best and do our best with our roles. And I think it's important that you're compassionate with yourself. Extend yourself grace. Make sure that you're kind to yourself in regards to being a caregiver and just in general. We have to care for ourselves first. And I know that's so contradictory to like the needs of your loved one are blaring. They are showing, and that's what's really getting everyone's attention. But we know to be true. You can ask anyone in any area, they'll tell you if you take care of yourself, your emotional needs, your physical needs, that is how you show up best as a caregiver. And so one thing I like to share is that I've done this before when I was a brand new social worker. I was asked to do a caregiver workshop, like for patients where I was working for their families. And I talked about all of these things that were outside of the home, like go get your nails done, go get your hair done. And after the session, a lady pulled me to the side. She's like, "You sure are cute." And I was like, "Well, thank you." She said, "But as a caregiver, we can't do any of that stuff. I have to take care of my husband 24 hours a day. I don't get to step away and get my hair done. I'm lucky if I get to take a bath." And it shifted my perspective. I'm glad she did it. So I didn't walk through my career in that bubble. But also, as I was more exposed to caregivers, one of the things I learned is that in order to really equip caregivers with what they need, we have to bring caregiving and support to them. And that's why programs like this are so critical, because it allows you to be in the space that you need to be to keep your loved one safe and adjust their needs, but also create a space where you can tune in for yourself as well. And so I'm going to share some things that are things that you can implement as part of your day that don't require you to step away from home. And so it's really important to try to practice breath awareness, at least for 10 minutes a day. So maybe while they're napping or they're using the restroom or engaged in another activity, take some moments to do some deep breathing exercises for yourself. And breath awareness is really where you're just focused on the sound of your breathing. There's 4-part breathing where you feel your belly, your chest, your neck, your head, and then breathe out. And this is a little different to this mindfulness. This is where we're just focusing just on our breath. And it's a part of mindfulness, but we just want to focus on our breathing. But then also like mind-body practices. So yoga, Tai Chi, meditation, mindfulness, and relaxation techniques. Imagery. I could be in a meeting, and if I, need to, I can teleport myself wherever I need to go. And that may be a good or a bad thing, I'm not sure. But I am able to use imagery and my breathing to help me, decompress a little bit and take me somewhere if the stimuli of the current moment is too much. And so that's a really important skill to learn. And I think Jackie is going to share in, maybe she already has done so, in one of the groups about mindfulness and meditation. And I think it's so important that we really start to practice about how we can use our mind to help aid us in really some of the self-care and releasing some of the anxiety, distress, and depression that comes with the role. Something that's not always as easy, but really important, is making eating well and getting quality sleep a priority. So I know getting quality sleep is tough, especially when you have to get up and down at night and you're having to check on your loved ones to make sure that they're safe. But eating well is really important. So we know that there are links to nutrition and overall health. And so when you're preparing those great healthy meals for your loved one, make sure you take one for yourself. Don't just eat a Snicker as you go. Make sure that you're really eating well. But then also quality sleep is really important. And I know it's tough, but maybe there's some things that you can do to create a sleep routine for you guys, for not only yourself, but also your loved one that you're caring for, so that you both are getting good quality sleep. So that means, shower, maybe soft music, and then we lay down, meditation and laying down, or we listen to a book or read a book, so that your body starts to understand that we're trying to get to a restful space and relaxing. Detaching from your screen and your social media so that you're not having that continuous stimuli is helpful as well. Oftentimes, I do a group as well for individuals with Alzheimer's. And one of the things that we've talked about so much is, maybe using some of your resources to get technology in place so that You don't have to physically get up and down to check on your loved one, but maybe you have a black and white monitor that allows you to be able to check on them if you hear a noise or those kind of things can often help with rest as well. Remaining socially connected. And I think this is really important because sometimes we feel detached as caregivers because it can be isolating. So really trying to make sure that the people that you're connected to, your social supports, you let them know that you still want to be engaged and you find ways to do so. One of the things I love about this season that we're in, as heartbreaking as this pandemic has been, is that we've pivoted to a virtual world where we've found ways to remain connected and connect to those supports that we really need, and have often been barriers for our caregivers and individuals with serious illnesses. So that means that, you don't have a reason to miss your checkup. You have a telehealth appointment. Get connected to a support group virtually. Maybe your spiritual groups are having virtual meetings, and then FaceTiming and all those different things. There are ways to really stay connected, but also when we're back free to go out into the world again, engaging in supports, finding respite opportunities. There are a lot of different organizations that are partnering and agencies that often provide respite services. Get with your social worker for what options are available in your community. But also speak up and use your voice. Make sure that those that you consider family or friends know, hey, I want to have someone come and hang out with my husband or dad or my spouse or my partner while I take a break. Because a lot of times people want to help, but they don't know how to be helpful. And so use your voice to identify ways that people can support. Or, one of the things I've had to tell caregivers often is that, yes, you may caregive best, right? You may love your loved one the best. And when someone else comes in, it may look different. But if their needs are met, they are safe, they're well taken care of. It may not look exactly how you do it, but that doesn't mean it's wrong. And so sometimes it's about power too, right? We don't ask for help or let people come in and do things to support us and help us because they don't do it the way we want them to do it. And so this is really important to make sure that you loosen up a little bit. Don't be so rigid. Let someone come in. Maybe they don't clean the baseboards the way you do, but let them come in and support. Maybe, when your sibling comes in and it's their turn to take care of your parents, they don't do care the way you do, or the aide or whoever. But as long as their needs are met and they're safe, have some conversations about how you like to have it done, but maybe not be as rigid. And so speak up, share what needs you have. And there are great apps like Caring Bridge and different things like that that can help you create a community for people that want to support you. And it should have been last, but enlist professional emotional support. I love being able to sit with families and patients and caregivers and help them process where they are in the space that they're in. And so there are a lot of trained licensed professionals that can help you process the emotional weight of caregiving. I tell people all the time that with all the things that come with caregiving that are beautiful about the experiences, there are also things that can sometimes be heartbreaking. And so it's important to get connected with a professional to help you deal and manage those feelings and emotions, so that when we're less likely to have complicated grief if something were to happen and our loved one leave us, because we process those things while they're here. And so it helps us with the experience. And so reach out and get connected to therapists. And if you guys want, I can help reach out to any of us. You can drop me a line. I'll try to see if we can find somebody in your area. But our social workers at our sites, get connected with the resources. Psychology Today is a great place to look for providers as well. But then also your EAPs, and your insurance also has registries of licensed clinical professionals that can help process your feelings and emotions. There are a lot of community organizations that also provide that support, like ACS and Cancer Support Communities, and our wonderful camps and Survive and Thrive services that we have here as well. So reach out and let us help you and get connected, get plugged in. We want to create a community of support. And so I think that's a great way to do that. I think we may have made it all the way through. You guys were able to hang out with me. The Texas Oncology Facebook, I think it's so important. The services and support that they have and they share. When you're looking for a community, you're looking for ways to plug in, please check in with them. And I want to see if we had any questions or anything that I missed in the chat that we can come back. And I want to make sure that I highlight and answer any of those questions, Kelly.
Absolutely. Stephanie, thank you so much for sharing. And like Stephanie said, if you have additional questions or comments you want to share, please keep using that chat. I love how active it's been, and thank you for just answering the questions as they were coming in. That was really great. I want to echo what Stephanie said, and I want y'all to check in with us. One of our new resources that is actually launching later this month is our Caregiver Connections. It is a new support group, all for caregivers, and we have a team of amazing Texas Oncology social workers that are going to be leading that group. Information just went live on our website yesterday, so go to our foundation website. It's www.texasoncologyfoundation.org/programs/support-groups, and I will be sure to include that in the follow-up email, but go check it out. We are going to be doing 2 monthly meetings, and so the first Thursday is going to be just our full hour of a support group discussion. And then our second monthly meetings on the third Thursday of each month is going to be kicked off with a guest speaker, and then there will be that support group discussion at the end of it. So we're really excited to kick that off. We want to support you guys, just as Stephanie said. Caregivers need that support too, and so it is one of our goals and our missions to provide that support to you guys, because you are such an integral part to that cancer journey.
Right. Yeah, we can't take care of patients without adequately taking care of caregivers. It's just a reality. And patients perform better when they're caregiver. They have great caregiver support. So,
absolutely, yep. I think you did a wonderful job of answering throughout the presentation. So I'm just going to wrap us up real quick. Thank you all for participating with us. Just a reminder, this session was recorded, and I'm going to send it in a follow-up email, so that way if you just need to go back over this information, you can, or if you want to share it with another friend or family that is helping in the caregiver process with you, you can. I will share the link for our new Caregiver Connection support groups coming up. And then tune in live with us again later this month. November 24th, we are actually having our next webinar, and we are excited to have a licensed dietitian with us, Karen Fields, and she is going to be doing a live cooking demo. So you can get some fun, healthy, easy to do recipes for your Thanksgiving meal. So come join us live for that. Lastly, we would love your feedback. In the follow-up email, there is going to be a survey, so please just give us your thoughts. And I just want to thank everybody for being with us today. We appreciate you guys. And thanks again, Stephanie.